A ministerial friend and colleague posted on Instagram a picture of a group of men who were seemingly armed in all black outfits and black and red face masks, carrying large black and red swastika flags, marching through the arts neighborhood of Columbus, Ohio, yesterday afternoon. They are reported to have called out racist and anti-Semitic and homophobic and sexist insults. It said maybe they pepper sprayed somebody as they walked by. It's still unclear what police action, if any, was taken. And last week, one of the main LGBTQ law groups in the city, the Journer Law Group, who my partner and I have used for name change purposes and documents to protect our rights to parent our children, they shared a blog post called "After the Election, Things Trans People Should Know Now," where it says right at the top of the page, Trump has vowed to pass a federal law to erase the existence of transgender and gender nonconforming people so that, quote, and they're quoting Trump, quote, "The only genders recognized by the U.S. government are male and female, and that they are assigned at birth." Pass a federal law to erase existence. And most of us, and maybe all of us in this space, awoke last Wednesday feeling that our country is about to be less safe, that people are about to have fewer resources for support in tough times. And some of us felt that this was a new experience. Maybe on Tuesday we felt safe and on Wednesday we didn't. Or that it was a renewed experience, that 4 years ago we didn't feel safe, but then it was okay for a little while, and now we fear not being safe again. Others of us felt the increased fear and worry on Wednesday morning, but it didn't feel new. Some of us who have never felt our country to be a place of safety, who have never trusted that resources would be available to us in times of struggle. And some of us feel the direction of the country is turning, and some of us feel that the reality of this country is simply being unveiled for what it always has been, but some of us have not seen. My friends, in either case, we are looking ahead to a time where those in political power have promised to make this country less safe for some of us. Many of us in this room, in this sanctuary, in this Zoom space, many of us watching this on YouTube weeks from now. We are grieving and we are angry and we are trying to figure out what comes next, what is our work to do, what is possible for us to do as we strive to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world. And if we have no other answers to the question of what can we do, we do know that deep in the core of our being, that we will figure it out together. Can I get an amen? Amen. We will figure it out together. And not just in little silos of people like us, but together with all kinds of people and all kinds of perspectives and all kinds of life experiences and identities. We often talk about the learning and working together across difference here at First Unitarian Church. And today I want to explore something a little bit different from learning and working across difference. I want to talk today to work together to explore the gifts and experiences of the both and the in-between, the gifts of the overlap and of the edges. The gift of, as Rev spoke about in our Time for All Ages, not just the day and the night, but the sunset, not just the ocean and the land, but the shore, not just the birds and the fish, but the puffins. Transgender and non-binary people are people of the both and the in-between, and the above and the beyond and the outside of. People who are assigned a gender at birth that does not align with the gender that they are. And so trans and non-binary people are often raised and socialized as one clear gender, but grow into the experience of a different gender. Whether that's a clear move from man to woman, which is true for some people, or a more nuanced move away from any preconceived notion of gender at all. And so trans and non-binary people often learn what it is to be a woman and to be a man and to be some other combination of genders. And in learning these multiple experiences of gender, trans and non-binary people hold important wisdom about the whole of what gender is. And these folks teach those folks, like myself, who fit neatly into one society-approved gender category. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? I want to say, throughout this service, like all of our services, we've crafted it to bring in multiple voices, multiple kinds of voices and identities and perspectives into our leadership and our source of wisdom. And I'm somebody who identifies as queer, which means that for me, romantic attraction over the course of my life has been towards people of all different kinds of gender expressions. And I'm also cisgendered, which means that the gender that I was assigned at birth still fits me pretty well. In speaking about the spiritual gifts and experiences of trans and non-binary folks and all the other both and people and in-between people, I'm drawing on what I've learned from being married to a transgender and non-binary person, as well as what I've learned from friends and former partners and thinkers and leaders who hold both and in-between identities. And I want to offer gratitude to my co-worship leaders today, all of whom hold both and in-between identities. Because there are lots of both and in between and above and beyond and outside of kinds of experiences in this world, right? Besides trans and non-binary people's experiences, there are people who are immigrants, who learn one place in culture and then move to another place in culture. And in learning how to be part of both places and both cultures, they know more about the experience of place and culture itself than those of us who never move from our hometowns. Both and in-between experiences is something that many or maybe most Black and Indigenous and other people of color know in this country where white culture is dominant, because most BIPOC people live life both as a participant in white-dominated mainstream US culture, as well as Black spaces or Latinx spaces or other spaces. Both and in-between experiences are known by anyone who has been so-called able-bodied and then becomes disabled, or vice versa. They're known by anybody who grew up fat and became thin, or vice versa. Anyone who grew up poor and became wealthy, or vice versa. Even the many in this faith tradition that grew up in one religious culture and are now participants in this one. My friends, do you recognize the experience of a both and or an in-between experience in yourself? How many of you feel like you've got one of those kinds of experiences? And if you didn't just raise your hand, how many of you know somebody close in your life who does have one of those experiences? Yeah, it's not a small segment of people far away. It lives within most of us and most of our loved ones' circles, at least a little bit. Many, many of us have some of this experience in our lives. And I will say that, though I am a white person, I have learned more about whiteness from people in my life who occupy both white cultural spaces and spaces of color, because these people can see things about white culture that I was taught to take for granted. And though I'm a cisgendered woman, I have learned an enormous amount about femininity from the trans men in my life, as they have often examined it much more thoroughly than I have as they have come to understand their own gender identity. I have learned so much more about what it means to be a US-born citizen in this world from my friends who have immigrated to this country or whose parents have immigrated to this country than those of us who have only ever known this citizenship. I've learned so much more about this faith from all of you who have grown up in other faiths than from those like me who grew up here in this faith. And in learning from both and in between and above and beyond and outside of others about parts of my experience that I take for granted, I've also been gifted into a window into others' experience. The spiritual gift of seeing our lives and the world with greater clarity, whether we have that gift because we are a person of the both and or the in-between and the overlap and the edge and the above and beyond, or because another has given us their insight into our own lives and a window into theirs. This spiritual gift is one of the most, if not the most, powerful personal and spiritual growth experiences available to us in our lifetimes. And I want to say that again because I believe it deeply. The gift of seeing our lives and each other with greater clarity that can only come from the ones who know the both and the in-between is one of the most powerful growth experiences available to any of us in our lifetimes. And when we see each other and when we see ourselves with clearer eyes, it gives us a chance to grow in compassion and empathy and self-knowledge. It gives us a chance to become better able to build justice in our world. When we know each other better, when we see ourselves and each other with clearer eyes, we are better able to know God or the holy or the ground of being or that which is most meaningful in our lives. On this day, when we honor Trans Day of Remembrance and Resilience, and I do invite all of you to join us for a vigil outside. It'll happen on the steps of the church a few minutes after the service today, and to participate in that ritual by writing prayers for the trans community, even if you can't stay for the vigil. We'll explain that more later. On this day, when we honor that annual holiday and we mourn the trans lives lost to hate-fueled violence and to suicide, and when we celebrate the resilience of a community beset by threat on every side, who still embodies joy and strength and survival, I want to say that we are not just celebrating trans people's right to exist, we are collectively giving deep thanks for the central spiritual gift of all of our lives, which only they and people like them can offer to our human community. So if you, my friends, are a both-and person, are an in-between person, a person who knows the overlaps and the edges, a person more sunset than day or night, a person more shore than land or ocean, I want to say thank you for the enormous gift of your very being, which offers all of us, both and in-between, and even the one side or the other people, the day and the night people and the ocean and the land people, access to that which matters most in this short, precious human life. Thank you. One of the things that I have learned about this culture that captivates our country, this mainstream white U.S. culture, is that it loves to categorize and it loves dominance. The initial human instinct to create categories itself, that's not a wrong human instinct, right? It's grounding for many of us to know who I am and who you are, and how we fit and how we belong and how we can contribute. I'm thinking like in simple ways. Clarity about our roles in a religious community like ours can help us all work together. Ushers know it's their job to welcome people, and so they show up and they welcome people. Band members know what their instrument is, even when some of them play many instruments. Worship associates and ministers each have a part to play, and distinguishing our roles helps us function better together. Distinguishing roles, having categories itself is not a bad thing. But when categorization is cemented into a culture, and it's based around something we cannot control, like our body that we were born into, or the color of our skin, or the nation of our birth, and one category is decided to be dominant by those in power, it becomes very easy to divide and conquer the rest of us, right? To limit our opportunities and our possibilities based solely on the category we fit into rather than, as Dr. King so famously said, the content of our character. In the US, the dominant categories of people here are often considered a default, not just dominant, but default, rather than one of the many expressions of being. And I'm thinking of like the centuries where mankind was a synonym for humankind in the English language, even though mankind is clearly only one part of humankind. And I'm thinking of how people who are white will often default to describing the race of other people if the other person is a person of color, but we will not describe other white people as white. What this means for the both and the in-between people, the people who are not only not in the dominant category, but also defy categories altogether, is often that they are not recognized for all of who they are. A mixed-race person is simply called black. A non-binary person is misgendered as she or he or both, but is not called they. Society's resources have for centuries been primarily funneled into the dominant categories of people, and public safety is afforded primarily to people who fit in one of these dominant categories. Most of the laws and protections that all of us are worried about losing in the coming political climate are ways that society has tried to correct against this pattern, right? Gay rights are only needed to be enshrined in new laws because they were not equally given in the default legal climate. And rights for people who are not only not dominant in our culture, but defy categorization are only just beginning to be created, now threatened to be destroyed. Reverend Jonah Overton, in their sermon, Lies I Heard in Church, Trans People Aren't Real, says that the transgender experience, quote, is an experience of perception mismatch most of all. They say it is being created and yet unseen and unrecognized. It is moving through the world fully in the glory of God you carry inside yourself and having other folks somehow look past you, see an approximation of who you are, and be too terrified to hold the fullness of your possibility, especially if it goes beyond their current understanding. We're using a lot of God language in this service because we're quoting a lot of trans theologians from the Christian tradition. But again, interpret God as love as you will, or whatever your definition of God is. Psychiatrist and neuroscientist Bessel A. van der Kolk, in his book, The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, writes, trauma almost invariably involves not being seen, not being mirrored, and not being taken into account. Trauma almost invariably involves not being seen. And so it is not only the experience of most of the both and the in-between people and the above and beyond people in this culture of lacking access to rights and public resources and public safety, but one of inherent trauma on a day-to-day basis every day of your life. No wonder suicide is such an ever-present experience in the trans and queer communities in our culture. Being able to feel safe with other people is probably the most important aspect of mental health, writes van der Kolk. Being able to feel safe with other people. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives, and numerous studies of disaster response around the globe have shown that social support is the most powerful protection against being overwhelmed by stress and trauma. Social support is not the same as merely being in the presence of others. The critical issue is reciprocity, he writes, being truly heard and seen by the people around us, feeling that we are held in someone else's mind and heart. He writes, traumatized human beings recover in the context of relationships. Recovery happens in the context of relationships with families and loved ones and AA meetings and veterans organizations and religious communities and professional therapists. The role of these relationships is to provide physical and emotional safety and to bolster the courage to tolerate and face and process what is happening around us. What I know, and what most of the queer and trans and the other in between and both and above and beyond and outside of people in this community know, is that those of us who face inherent trauma in our day-to-day living have also created communities to help us recover from that trauma. Queer and trans and non-binary communities and immigrant communities and other communities are places where people can be seen and heard and safe. And my friend, that kind of community is the kind of community that we have always been trying to build here at First Unitarian Church. And that kind of community is the kind of community that all of us will need to be creating in the coming days and weeks and months and years to ward off the loss of resources and the loss of public safety and the increased day-to-day trauma that so many of us will be experiencing. We've been working, Rev and I, just in the past week to figure out what new tools we can offer to this community. And so I invite those of you who haven't seen it in the e-beacon yet or looked at your announcement sheet today to consider signing up for a Reading for Resistance group. This will be groups where you get to know other people and learn from above and beyond and in between and both and people and other thinkers and writers and leaders who have been thinking about how we can resist for a long time. And we invite you most Wednesday nights here. We are working on creating some kind of spiritual practice. First Wednesdays will be Vesper services. Is it third is meditation? Third will be meditation. We're working on a second and fourth yoga practice on Wednesday nights as well. We hope that you will join us for some of those or find something similar somewhere else in your life. Writer Zadie Smith speaks of the cultural phenomenon of camp. So some of you might be familiar with this camp, the idea of like being kind of campy, which I learned as I was a kid. I learned it as a kid as meaning something like tacky, but which I and you and so many others have reclaimed through drag and other art forms as being just fabulosity. Writer Zadie Smith defines camp as doing more than is necessary with less than you need. Doing more than is necessary with less than you need. Camp begins in lack, she says, in absence. It is the nuclear option of the disenfranchised. And it is why so much of drag is extravagant and sequiny and fabulous, and hair is high and heels are high and everything is colorful, even when it's all found at a thrift store. What I've learned from queer community, that is they have learned how to get through times that are coming. And so many of our other communities have already learned how to get through times that are coming because when they woke up on Wednesday morning, it wasn't a new experience to see that their resources were going to be cut and their rights were going to be reduced and public safety was not for them. And so we are mostly people of both and in between communities. I want to hear you call out what's something that you've learned from one of those communities or one of those people in your life that will get us through the next political climate. Joy. Oh, so many. Wait, say it again. Shout. What'd you say, Story? Resilience. Empathy, courage, mutual aid, harm reduction. What'd you say, Dennis? Acceptance, defiance, music. I have learned from those communities that we need to allow ourselves to change and allow each other to change, that we must speak up, that love is always at the center. You ever see RuPaul speak? She talks about love. I've learned from the queer community that you can choose your family. I've learned from the queer community how to care for one another when we have nothing, how to help someone who has been kicked out of all they've ever known rebuild their life. I have learned that mental health matters and that healthcare matters and that laws and legal battles are important, but so is the creation of community right here and right now, every day. And I've learned how to laugh and how to sing and how to be extravagant. My friends, we will be doing that here. We have been doing it for years. We are going to keep doing it for years. And we have been building new spiritual practices and new tools to read for resistance and build community for resistance. And we are going to be building new tools for joy, too. Can I get an amen? My friends, whether you came into this service knowing that you were a both and or in between or above and beyond and outside of categories person, I hope that you will leave this service knowing that you are one of those people or that you need to become one, because this is how we will survive, my friends. The incredible spiritual gift of the both and the in-between is given to all of us to know ourselves more clearly, to know each other more clearly, to create love and heaven on earth right here, right now, regardless of what the political climate is outside of us. Amen, and blessed be.
Hi, I'm Reverend Abby Tennis, and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Reverend Alexandre da Silva Soto, and my pronouns are they, them, and theirs.
And we are the ministers of the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, where it is our mission to awaken love and justice in our lives and in the world. We're so glad you watched this video, and we hope that its message connects with your soul.
We also want to invite you to join us for Zoom services Sunday morning at 11 a.m. or come in person at 2125 Chestnut Street, Center City, Philadelphia.
Whether you join in person or online, in these services you'll hear messages like you just heard. You'll get a chance to sing together, pray together, and even greet one another in coffee hour afterwards, whether you're brand new or a longtime member.
You can always find a Zoom link to our services and more about what to expect on Sunday mornings on our website, philauu.org, philauu.org. The link is below.
If you are connecting with this message and feel moved to give to the mission of this congregation, we invite you to click on the link below again and follow the prompts to give, or send a text message to 215-709-5095, and again, follow the prompts.
If someone in your life needs to hear these words today, please share this video. And again, thank you so much for watching.
We hope to see you soon.
See you soon.